The chill rushes straight from your legs to your spine, as if the stone itself were about to freeze your bone marrow. There is no straw, no blanket, no pity, and if the land cursed by the prisoners hundreds of years before you. The fact is that medieval prisons were not intended for reforming people, nor even for making them live comfortably. They were originally meant to be pens, a cruel reminder of power. Historians point out that early castles almost incidentally also served as prisons. Unused storage space has turned into a prison cell, and those who were unfortunately thrown in can only endure it. A mainstream fact is that the Tower of London, one of the most notorious castles, operates precisely in this way. The cold room and damp walls, with no consideration for comfort at all. The idea of prisons as correctional institutions dates back several centuries. You seem more like you're in a pit than in a bedroom now. But here is a strange gossip. Some chroniclers joke that the city wall itself provided companionship. They would carve their names on stones and whisper to the marks left by forgotten souls, as if those etched marks were neighbors who might respond. He glanced around at the letter abbreviations that had been dug out and suddenly felt less lonely, although it wasn't worn. However, scholars are still debating how these cells were deliberately created. Some people think that coldness is a side effect of buildings. Thick stones block the moisture in winter, and narrow gaps cause cold air currents to gather. Others insist that cold is a purposeful cruelty, a silent torture aimed at weakening the body and spirit. No matter what, when you lie awake in bed, your skin will sting and your breathing will become murky. Consider whether you can survive until morning. Become your lullaby. The watered rockets in the corridor echoed like hollow clocks. Amos ran to an invisible place. The claws clicked on the stone. Perhaps a guard was changing shifts, his boots making a faint thumping sound. Every brook is reminding you. You are locked inside, watched or ignored, forgotten in the endless darkness. If you are lucky enough to still have the cape, pull it tighter. Many do not. Imagine you are sitting here wearing only a thin wool shirt, and as time goes by, your teeth are pounding together like mallets. Sometimes you feel a gentle breeze brushing past your face, as if a ghost is brushing past it. You wonder if it's air seeping in through the narrow window, or the memory of someone who froze to death here centuries ago. You might not be able to survive. It's neither because of stubbornness nor because of kindness. But then again, survival in medieval prisons was rarely related to fairness. It's about enduring a cold night. The walls didn't move, but seemed to be getting closer. Cold can do this. It presses, squeezes. It convinces you that you are shrinking. Your heart rate slows down. Your limbs hurt. Images of the fireplace that you would never see again began to emerge in your mind. The prisoners beside you, if you have any, breathe very shallowly and wrap themselves up like a bundle of sticks. Perhaps you are jealous of his ability to sleep. The first night this dragged on for a long time, not measured by hours but by tremors. There are no stars to guide you, only endless darkness. In the darkness you begin to wonder whether it is the stone floor that is harder, or the cold itself that is sharper. Which one will claim you first? You woke up. If you had ever slept, your cheek was pressed under something rough, sharp and weak. A straw. It crackles under your heavy pressure. But at the moment you transform, something slips away, and you realize that you are not alone. Fleas, lice, and even one or two spiders have already taken up residence in your bed. You instinctively scratched, only to feel the wound rise immediately under your fingers. The bedding of the Middle Ages was nothing like the hay bales in the barn. Simple and romantic. Here in the cell, it's more like lying in a fire bag that has been dragged across the pigsty. A mainstream fact is that the majority of prisoners in Europe do not have real bedding. The best minus-case scenario is that a guard would throw in a handful of straw, a gesture that is more practical than sympathetic. It can absorb dirt and is easier to burn and replace than scrubbing stone floors. According to the records of French and British castles, prisoners squatted on these straw mats for weeks, sometimes months, until the bedding rotted into sour sludge. You moved again, and the itchy feeling spread throughout your arms, just like a series of living little mouths. Here's a strange gossip. There were so many fleas that some prisoners joked they were roommates and even gave them names. A satirical work from the 14th century depicted a person more loyal than a prison guard. You gave a wry smile to yourself. If you are naming a bud, you know your mind has begun to crumble. However, historians are still debating whether straws had any real thoughts. Is it for charity or to prevent people from dying prematurely? Or was it purely an oversight, with the debris thrown in merely to prevent waste from piling up to the ceiling? Some people think that the guards have become accustomed to this practice because shoveling away the rotten hay is less laborious than scraping the smooth floor full of human suffering. You lay quietly trying to breathe through your nose. The air was filled with rotten straw mixed with sweat and a damp, sweet and sour smell. Every time you exhale, a cloud of dust is blown onto your face, and the particles stick to your lips. When you cough, the echoes rustle in the deeper areas where they accumulate. Mice dig holes in their beds to keep warm. The scratching sound filled the silence, interrupted by the pounding of your heart in your ears. You wonder if it's possible to sleep, or if this straw mat is just a stage for torture. The stinging sensation will not cease. No matter how you yield at your skin, soon you will imagine them crawling inside your body, burrowing into your hair, ears and clothes. You turned sideways and gazed into the shadow. Another prisoner was snoring softly, nonchalantly, perhaps resigned to fate. His shoulders rose and fell, and his hair was filthy. You envy his surrender, even though you know he will be itchy all over when he wakes up. The straw is moving beneath you again, like an uneasy beast. In this transformation, you will experience the true cruelty of bedding. It promises liberation from the stone, but it only offers a different kind of discomfort. It is softer to your bones, but sharper to your thoughts. You scratched again, wondering if dawn would come or if the flea would suck you dry first. Your back will hurt from twisting and turning all night on the straw, which is more like thorns than bedding. When the guard came back, dragging his boots and rubbing against the stones, he said nothing. He pushed your pile of pest-infested hay aside and pointed at a wooden board against the wall in the corner. It seems that you are about to graduate tonight. You drag the board to the middle of the cells and brush off the mold on the surface that is covered with green spots. The damp smell of oak mingled with the ammonia smell of a night pot. When you lower yourself, the surface will become very uneven. Fragments are stuck in your coat. Your spine records every groove and every knot. You moved again, but the iron ring on the floor stopped you from moving. The iron chains jingled, as cold as winter water. Suddenly, the wooden board didn't feel like a bed but more like a punishment stool. A mainstream historical fact is that many medieval prisons had no straw at all. Only planks or bare planks fixed to the walls, sometimes at a certain angle, so if you wanted to rest comfortably you would slide down. Records from Newgate Prison in London show that prisoners were chained, their wrists and ankles pulled to anchor points, lying on planks, and their bodies worse from being unable to move. This is a bizarre gossip. It is speculated that some prison guards charge rent for the privilege of using wooden boards. If you can't afford it, go back to the stone you went to. In a 15th-century story, a thief managed to scrape together a few cents from a sympathetic tourist, only to have the guard put it in a bribe bag and laugh and threw the bed away. Imagine the absurdity in it. Even pain can be taxed. However, scholars hold different opinions on whether wooden boards are regarded as an enhancement of comfort or a cruel reduction. Some people think they are very hygienic and easier to clean than straws. Others, however, countered that this was intentional torture, with the aim of keeping the prisoners half-minus awakened, never allowing them to truly rest. It seems quite obvious that you are shifting your weight again. The iron chain will bite into your skin, and the iron will only give you a slight heat around your ankles. You try to bend your body, but the length of the chain is stingy. Every time you pull your knees in, the board of directors is clumping at your feet, groaning as if dissatisfied with the company. Every step turned into a negotiation. And you're the debris pressing on your shoulders and moving, and feel the iron penetrating your bones. Silence reverberates in your ears, only the metallic rhythm of the iron chain rubbing against each breath breaks the silence. You imagine the echoes passing through the corridor and reaching those who were handcuffed in their cells. Another captive coughs somewhere, his voice deep and low, just like the church bells ringing in a cave. You try to close your eyes, but your body refuses to rest. The wooden board is a parody of the bed, a mockery that promises to relieve and bring pain. You know, in this place sleep itself is a luxury, just like bread and air, which are available in limited quantities. You lick your teeth with your tongue, feeling the grains of sand from the day sticking to your gums. The chain pulled again, and it suddenly occurred to you. Not only are you nailed to this board, but you are also bound by the cold logic of imprisonment. Here, even your dreams must kneel before iron. When night falls again, the first thing you notice is that the chill is even stronger tonight. It presses down on it, like an extra blanket. It is made of ice, but the plank beneath you shows you no mercy. You try to roll towards the wall, hoping that the stone can at least block the airflow seeping out from the arrow crevice above. On the contrary, this wall feels like a frozen tombstone, absorbing a little bit of heat stored in your body. Then you heard it. A faint rustling sound came from the other side of the cell. A low, dry and cracked cough. A body moving in the straw. You are not alone. This is the first time that this fact hasn't scared you. It kindled a glimmer of hope. When the night becomes the cruelest, humans will do what domestic animals have always done. They huddle together. You are approaching slowly. The person beside you looks very haggard. His face was enveloped by the light of the flashlight coming in through the half-open door. He doesn't speak, but when you lie side by side with him, he won't walk away either. The heat from the other body emitted a faint glow through the rough wall. Let me remind you that you haven't been completely abandoned. This is the mainstream historical fact. Records from prison registrations across Europe show that prisoners often share sleeping spaces, not for friendship but for survival. In Paris, investigators listed the entire family that was imprisoned together, all crammed into one cell. In the UK, prisons are so crowded that men sleep on top of each other, forming a terrifying pyramid of corpses to keep warm. It doesn't matter whether you like your cellmate or not. His warmth is a resource as precious as food. Here is a strange gossip. Some monasteries have turned into temporary prisons. The prison guards jokingly called the prisoners pigs, not only because they lived in filthy places, but also because they huddled together like pigs in a pigsty on winter nights. Some people even claim that in those dark rooms, the smell of sweat and heat is no different from that in a barnyard. You almost laughed at this comparison until you mixed your neighbor's soreness with your own smell, only then realizing how accurate this insult might be. Despite this, historians are still debating whether such collective sleeping was tolerated or even encouraged by the prison warden. Some evidence suggests that the prison guards deliberately crowded the prisoners together, on the grounds that the collective heat of the organization could make them live longer, thereby preserving their ransom value or appearing in court. Others, however, consider this merely a matter of carelessness. When the cells were overcrowded, they had no choice but to pile up people like firewood and let themselves figure out how to endure it. The truth may lie somewhere between the practicality disguised as cruelty. Your companion rambled, his voice piercing through your bones like the sound of a drum. You imitate his curled posture, with your knees close to your chest and your arms crossed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, you feel a little of the frost dissipating. Breathing and blending. The space between you is filled with a damp warmth. That smell is not the pleasant smell of sweat, old straw or unwashed clothes, but you accept it with pleasure, just like a traveler who has been in the desert for a few days and then accepts muddy water. Lunch does not refresh you, it does not amortize you. Press your ear against his shoulder blade and you hear his heartbeat, slow and steady. You realize that at this moment, the pulse of this stranger is as comforting as a lullaby. You can imagine how many people in centuries of castles and dungeons approached those they might dislike in broad daylight merely for the sake of survival. You can't help but wonder how many seemingly impossible alliances were born in this way, forged on cold nights. You will be distracted. You imagine a knight and a beggar lying back to back, with her status erased by necessities. Imagine a noblewoman being captured in a besieged city, facing a peasant woman who had once begged outside her magic door. The cold makes everyone here feel equal. Chains and frost do not care about titles. But the long night stretches on, and even the shared warmth is fragile. At some point, your companion wakes up convulsing, mutters to himself in his sleep, and then rolls away. Distance is direct. Cold air rushed in like an enemy occupying the ground. You hesitate. Your pride whispered no. But the pain deep in your heart insists, yes. So, you moved a little closer, feeling embarrassed, to absorb as much heat as possible. The silence between you two represents a wordless deal. We won't talk about these, but we still need them. Another voice pierced in. A faint hiss came from the other side of the fence. You raised your head and noticed the figure curled up in another corner. The boy is no older than 14 years old. Their slender skeletons are tightly packed together, and you simply can't tell which is the end and which is the beginning. You will suddenly realize that this way of survival is not limited to repeat offenders or adult prisoners. Even the children soon understood that only getting close is the real blanket. Close your eyes again. The cells turned into a chorus of breathing, slow, uneven, human. The cold air current was still slowly pouring in, but the body's heat formed a fragile foam to fend off the worst weather. You know, the fleas are still biting, the straw is still wet, and the chain is still heavy. But in this brief intimacy, the feeling of pain has lessened a little. Perhaps this is the cruelest part. The guards might separate you tomorrow. Tomorrow, this person who has now permeated your body might be dragged to the gallows. When you wake up tomorrow, you will find that the straw is already cold and the shoulders beside you are stiff. Nothing is eternal, not even friendship. But now, tonight, you allow yourself to rest in the fragile and comfortable body of another living person. You gradually fell into a half-minus asleep, half-minus awake state, only occasionally hearing the moaning of wood above your head and the dripping of water from the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, the bell rang. Perhaps it marks midnight, perhaps it marks death. You can't tell. You drew closer, snuggling up in the warmth that didn't belong to you, but it felt like redemption. The morning will bring hunger, cold and a new round of pain. But in this rare moment of tranquility, you will find that survival does not always rely on strength or willpower. Sometimes it just pierces through the darkness, approaches, pretends, and even if it's only for a few hours, warmth means safety. The air in this part of the castle feels different. The moisture still sticks to your skin, but there's something else. An echo, a rhythm. You will get infected when you hold your breath. A low hum somewhere above your head. They are not prisoners muttering to themselves in the dark, but monks, whose hymns rolled down the stones step well in syllables you cannot understand. The voice swayed between comfort and strangeness, as if the prayer himself were wandering between heaven and hell. The cells you are staying in tonight are not in the main fortress, but in a converted religious building. After all, the monastery is a solid building, already equipped with thick walls and locked rooms. When a king or lord needed a dexterous space to imprison captives, it was easy to transform a monastery into a prison. You lean against the wall and feel the faint vibration of the hymn, as if the stone itself were humming. The records of this period clearly show that many religious sites were either formally or informally used as prisons. The Pope's records describe the monks responsible for guarding the pagans. Not only did the sounds of prayer echo in their cells, but also the coughing of the prisoners. Some abbots even rented their idle rooms to local authorities, turning prayer rooms into prophetic ones. It was not uncommon for prisoners to be forced to kneel on the cold stone slabs with evening prayers ringing above their heads. There is a strange little story in the chronicles of the 14th century. In a primary school in the UK, prisoners were locked so close to the church that they began to imitate hymns and shout out half-minus spoken verses loudly. The guards called it mockery, but some monks claimed it was evidence of repentance. Imagine that in a place where boredom is more severe than hunger, praying is a form of entertainment. Researchers still have differences of opinion on the monks' own views on this arrangement. Do they think that prisoners are lost souls worthy of guidance even in shackles? Or are they merely burdensome masters, forced to place dangerous people beside libraries and churches? There is little written evidence. The tone of the existing documents has changed from sympathy to anger, which makes us unsure whether charity or convenience is a more powerful motivation. Stretch out your limbs and listen carefully. The hymns undulate like waves. For a moment, you let the sound carry you, and the chill in the cell seemed less intense. Rhythm has a hypnotic nature, almost like a lullaby. Your eyes grew heavy, but then the sound was cut off, replaced by silence, so thorough that it was almost violent. There is no sound to remind you how lonely you are. The smell of this place is different from the stench of a crowded dungeon. The air here was filled with beeswax from the candles above, and occasionally, wisps of cigarette smoke would seep in through the cracks. It strangely mixed the sense of straw, mold, and unwashed corpses. You inhale, exhale, struggling between the distraction of gratitude and the conflict of disgusting smells. Your cellmates sometimes whisper to each other. Their voices are very low and you can only hear some fragments, complaints, prayers, and the names of family members they might never see again. You find yourself whispering too, not to them but to that stone, as if that wall would answer you. Perhaps before you, countless people did just that. You rubbed your hand against the surface, feeling the faint marks left by your desperate fingers. The cross, the initial letter, the rough face, the silent testimony carved on limestone, echoes the hymn you just heard. Time crawls. A bell rang out above. Its sound deep among the layers of stones. Perhaps it's the midnight vigil. The monk stood up to pray, while you lay there shivering, not knowing if they had time to consider the captives beneath them. When they kneel on the padded bench, do they imagine your sleepless body, or did you forget, buried alive beneath the hymns? The airflow has become sharp. You pulled your tattered coats tighter, but the cold still seeped in through every crack. Beside you, another prisoner is murmuring Latin, not praying but imitating. His voice was bitter, imitating the monk's chanting. God knocked hard at the door, telling him to shut up. The echo lingers on, just like a shadow you can't shake off. Among modern historians, the debate over whether such a religious environment is more benevolent or more cruel than castles and dungeons continues. Some people believe that approaching prayer will offer the captives a kind of spiritual comfort, even if their bodies are frozen. Others insist that it is even more cruel when you are locked in the dark and hear the song of redemption singing above your head. As the night gets longer, both of these explanations are correct in your ears. Sleep is intermittent. You dozed off in a daze to the monk's repetitive rhythm of Kyrie eleison, only waking up when the chanting ceased. The silence was unbearable. Dreams and reality are mixed together. The stone mast turned into cold cells. The golden altar blurred into dripping walls. Every time you wake up, you feel more tired than before and are not sure if you have fallen asleep. In that half-minus dream place somewhere, you remember the story of the pagans being burned to death just a few steps away from the monastery where they once lived. Imagine yourself being dragged out of this cell at dawn, hearing that hymn above, with your hands tied up ropes. This idea didn't scare you. This is almost like the natural ending of that song that you were forced to endure. The candlelight in the church flickered faintly through the gaps in the bricks and stones, as thin as a blade. You stare at it until your eyes hurt, tracking its movement as if it could pierce through your pain. The flames are trembling, and so is your determination. You wonder if tomorrow will bring warmth or just more chances to remind you of what you have lost. When you curled up in the straw again, you imitated the monk above and whispered something you didn't really want to say. The syllables sound unfamiliar, but the rhythm is very soothing. For a moment, you believe that the hymn will take you somewhere beyond frost, fleas, and darkness. But when the sound vanishes from your throat, only silence answers, and the cold remains the master of the night. The next day, you will pass through a narrow passage, climb a spiral staircase filled with the smell of rust and candle smoke, and enter a room deep in the castle. This time it's different again. The walls flew higher, the air grew colder, and the torches on the walls burned with gloomy, uneven flames. You'll soon realize that this is not a temporary cell in the monastery. This is a genuine royal dungeon. Kind stories are quietly spreading here. Stones are not just the floor beneath your feet. It combines a bed, a chair, a blanket and a coffin, are condensed on the wall. The damp marks flowed into the grooves of the flagstones like a small river. You crouched down expecting straw or planks, but there was nothing but bare rocks, smoothed by the weight of humanity over the centuries. Historians in the late Middle Ages clearly indicated that the design of castle dungeons was both for deterrence and for restraint. They don't just take up space. They are the stages of power, reminding everyone who enters that the crown or the lord controls life and death. The Tower of London, Chateau Castle Street, Angelo's Castle throughout Europe, the same pattern is being repeated. The coldness of the dungeon is as famous as its chains. And travelers of the 13th century described a strange story. It described the prisoners of the ruined castle, who themselves swore that these stones had absorbed heat from a person like leeches. Chroniclers did not argue about this. He merely noticed that those who came in had pale faces and left even paler. Now, as your palm slides across the stone slab, you feel the same pulling force, as if the floor itself has a sense of hunger. Experts still disagree on whether these rooms are destined to be so unbearable. Some architectural historians believe that the depth of the castle and the narrowness of the windows were practical. Defense comes first, comfort is of no importance. Others, however, believe that this design is deliberately cruel, using ventilation and darkness as unspoken tools of punishment. No matter which viewpoint is correct, the result will be the same. Your body trembled uncontrollably, even before night fell. As night falls, you will notice the difference in acoustic effects between the royal dungeon and the small cells. Every movement reverberated strangely. When you move, your chains jingle, and the sound bounces back on the ceiling like a mocking one. Even your breathing sounds too loud, as if the entire room is informing you. You imagine the guards above, listening to every rustling sound of yours. The smell here is also stronger because there are no straws to absorb the dirt. Waste and sweat seep directly into the stones, generating a foul mineral smell that burns your nostrils. You think of the incense wafting from the temple walls and realize how cruel Contrast Island is. In such a place only decay can be preserved. You lie flat and press your shouldered blades against the rock. This feeling is astonishing. It is neither soft nor sharp. This is an unfeeling pressure. No matter how you change, it won't change. As time goes by, your body feels scarred and your bones ache, as if stones are shaping you. You turn sideways, but the chain was pulled too tight, and your ankle ached faintly. The faint sounds of the castle could be heard above boots treading on the wooden floor, dogs barking, and the sound of water flowing from the porch channel. Everything drifts down like memory from a world where you no longer belong. You wonder if the royal family in their room ever thought that the people below would freeze to death. For them, the reason why dungeons are useful is precisely because they are invisible. Close your eyes and try to imagine the firelight. You imagine a fireplace, with embers emitting an orange glow and the crackling sound of wood. But the dungeon insists on its own existence. It's pitch-minus dark here. Even swallow the light of the torch until one feels floating in the void. You trembled again, realizing that in this place, imagination was the only warmth allowed. Then, in a cold and humorous moment, you will think of some phrases that the guards are said to use, the king's embrace. This is what they call the cold stone floor. Because once you lie on it, it will hold you tighter than any lover and be just as reluctant to let you go. You chuckle softly, your voice reflecting back from the wall, sounding just like another prisoner laughing in the dark. For a moment, you don't feel so lonely, but the cold is even harder. You curl up on yourself, clearly exhaling into the air, telling your body to be patient. In another night, you whispered, 1 more hour. To count your heartbeats to deceive yourself, making yourself feel that time passes faster. However, the dungeon has its own clock, and the intervals of water dripping from the ceiling are so irregular that it drives people crazy. Plop, silence, plop, silence. This pace will prevent you from enjoying a comfortable sleep. Historians are still unsure exactly how many people survived in the royal dungeons. Some records show that prisoners would bargain with guards for months, or even years in exchange for scraps of bedding or coins. Others claim that most people become emaciated within a few weeks, and their bodies have already exhausted before the trial arrives. The truth might lie in the middle, but on luck, bribery, or noble birth. As the night deepened, their thoughts drifted to the world above. The banquet was shining brightly in the hall, the flags echoed with music, and the meats sizzled on the grill. You almost tasted the fats, smelled the roasted herbs, and heard the laughter of the court officials. Then you opened your eyes again, and all that greeted you was darkness stones, and the shrill sound of your untrembling breath. This contrast is sharper than any blade. You hugged yourself and realized that this dungeon was more than just a stone prison. It is an emotional prison designed to deprive you of every comfort you know. Here even warm thoughts fade like memories. As you gradually fall into intermittent light sleep, the stone presses its demands even deeper, shaping you into yet another nameless form in its long history of captives. Iron has its own voice. Every time you move it, it will make jingling sounds, scraping sounds, or dull banging sounds on the stones. So far, this sound has become part of the night music. The sound of dripping water, the buzzing of running rats, the sound of closing doors in the distance, and the metal bite marks of iron chains. You gently pulled them, testing their connection as if they would break tonight. But they never did. They cut your ankle with cold precision, reminding you that the only warmth in this cell comes from friction, not kindness. Written records from prisons in the United Kingdom, France, and the Holy Roman Empire describe the iron shackles in detail. Prisoners were sometimes tied to their wrists, sometimes to their ankles, and sometimes both. The weights vary. Some people fixed short chains to the wall to force them to squat down. There were still people dragging long iron chains, and wherever they went, the chains would scrape along. These restraints are not merely for preventing escape. They themselves are a form of punishment, reducing blood circulation, making joints stiff, causing metals to freeze in moisture, and making the body feel cold. In the Bishop's Register of Ely Prison, there is a particularly peculiar anecdote circulating. A prisoner claimed that he was so cold that he deliberately pressed his wrist against the shackles, hoping that the friction would generate warmth. Of course, the temperature at which metals burn is lower. You can imagine his despair. It's almost understandable. Compared with the numb pain in the dungeon, even the pain felt like heat. Experts hold different opinions on whether chains should be widely used or selectively applied. Some people think it is taken for granted that every prisoner should wear shackles. Others, however, believe that it depends on the rank and the crime. Nobles may not be punished, while thieves and debtors are often punished. The evidence is incomplete, trapping you in a debate that scholars have yet to resolve. But tonight you only know one fact. Shackles are ruthless truth. If you stretch your legs, the chain will pull you. The iron ring on the floor was rubbing slightly. A scream echoed in the darkness. You try to adjust your posture and curl your knees, but the chain only allows this much movement. Soon, your thighs will burn as you strive to find an existent posture. The coldness of iron will penetrate deeper into your skin until it feels integrated with you. But it didn't ease. There was only one feeling: you were tearing the wound apart, and it would never heal in this place. The quacking sounds you make yourself will make you back off. It feels as if every loud bang is announcing your weakness, sending messages through the walls to the guards you'll never see. You press the chains onto the floor, trying to calm them down, but they still vibrated like bells struck by an invisible hand. The smell of this part of the cells is different again. Iron itself has a sharp metallic smell, almost like blood. It mixes with molten straw until the air becomes heavy and has a rusty smell. Every breath brings this scent to your tongue, and you wonder if you will taste it for the rest of your life. You try to distract yourself with memories. You imagine the green sunlight warming your shoulders and walking barefoot on the soft ground. You stretch out in the space of imagination with your arms outstretched and your legs free. But the moment your real foot touches the iron, the fantasy is shattered. The chains are louder than your thoughts. Some prisoners carved patterns on the walls with shackles, using iron itself as a rough tool. Foul language. Archaeologists discovered such traces in dungeons several centuries later. You test it by holding the chain against the wall. This kind of scratch is satisfactory, almost rebellious. But the echo reminds you of how futile it is to carve your existence on the rock. Yes, but who will see it? Time passes very slowly. Sleep is intermittent, and each one is broken by the pressure of metal on the bones. Sometimes you wake up suddenly because your legs are numb. The blood was cut by the iron chain. You shake it out and hear the jingling sound again, realizing that your nights now belong completely to the chains. Experts have not yet reached a consensus on whether shackles will significantly shorten their lifespan or merely make them more miserable. Some people believe that frostbite, infection and immobility have caused thousands of deaths. Others said that many people endured for months or even years, and these irons became strangely familiar. No matter what the statistics are, your own body feels deteriorating, your joints are stiff, and your blood circulation is failing, so it continues its abnormal lullaby at night. Bump bang. You start to recognize the rhythm within it. Just like in music. Their fingers tapped gently on your knees along with the water droplets. Let the chain strike and combine with your own metal. The dungeon turned into a distorted concert hall. Your suffering is the only symphony. When you finally close your eyes, what you dream of is not freedom, but still walking in this world with chains and tow. That voice followed you like a curse. In the dream, no one else heard. Only you. You try to shout, but your voice is silent. The bell kept ringing until you woke up. Your ankle was still burning and your ears were still ringing. When the faint light of dawn pierces through the arrow, you realize the cruelest truth. The night has not lifted your shackles. It only teaches you to listen in different ways. They have become your companions, your captives, and constantly remind you that even in silence, the cold will not truly allow you to rest. The night is deepening, but now what I turn a blind eye to you is no longer silence. It's the taste. When you first entered this room, your nose was wrinkled, but you thought you would get used to it. On the contrary, as time went by, the smell grew stronger and stronger, as if the walls themselves were sweating and rotting. You inhaled carefully and tasted the musty, sour and metallic odor on your tongue. The straw you once cursed has begun to turn black in the corner, absorbing urine, sweat and the occasional vomiting of prisoners. These prisoners are too weak to climb towards the swill bucket. The description of contemporary records is beyond doubt. The dungeons of the Middle Ages were both physical and olfactory attacks. Clark wrote that the stench in prison was strong enough to kill a person who had not yet been sentenced. In some castles, tourists even faint before reaching the lower rooms. This smell is not accidental. This is something that is constantly woven into the structure of imprisonment. You lie on your back, realizing that every breath is a punishment and every inhalation is a reminder of decay. Strangely enough, some reports describe the guards making jokes about the perfume of justice. They claim that this smell could drive away curious people and prevent prisoners from attempting to escape through narrow shafts or drainage ditches. You can almost imagine a giggling guard standing at the door, insisting that the stench is part of the king's safety plan. Black humor, yes, but in this place, humor is as rare as sunshine. As for how these conditions were intentional, researchers remain divided. Some people believe that pollution is inevitable, water supply is limited, there is no ventilation, and there is endless congestion. Others, however, believe that the neglect was intentional. The worse the conditions, the more terrifying the reputation of the castle becomes. This reputation in turn serves as a deterrent. Both possibilities are possible because your stomach has turned around again and you have held back the bile. The air was heavy, as if the dungeon itself were a lung-spitting poison. You can also catch the faint odors of other layers. The smell of rust on the iron chain and the musk from the unwashed corpse. Beneath all these, there is no doubt the stench of death. You think it's nearby. Corpse lay there for too long without being claimed. Your throat is tight. You know. Death is everywhere here. Sometimes it lies in the straw, sometimes it leans against the wall, and sometimes it only goes crazy when the smell becomes unbearable. Your ears become sharp in the dark. A prisoner coughed with a wet throat and spat into the corner. Another person moaned in his sleep, muttering curses, which later turned into sobs. In all of this, the oppressive smell of mold and waste lingered. You press your sleeve against your face, but the clothes will also smell bad. That smell stuck, seeped through and persisted. At some point, a mouse emerged from the shadow, its nose twitching. It jumps on your chest and then rushes towards the corner, with a bucket overflowing. You freeze and then exhale. The mouse showed no fear at all. You coldly admitted that it was also a part of this prison ecosystem. The feast of rats, the flourishing of fleas, and the spread of molds minus all the struggles are just breathing. Records from the following centuries show that some prisons burned urns or sprinkled limes to eliminate odors, but in your current cell, there is no such comfort. The stench is unfiltered, rough, intimate and familiar. You start to wonder if your sense of smell will recover, or if every meal you eat, if you eat freely again, will have a faint rotten smell. Historians still have differences of opinion on the extent to which odors affect survival, that this is more likely to dampen morale than flogging. Others have noticed the spread of the disease, indicating that polluted air has accelerated deaths from pneumonia, fever, or plague. In either case, the conclusion is the same. Prisoners do not only sleep in the cold. They sleep in filth, and with each sigh, the filth invades their lungs. You turn sideways trying to avoid the air current with the strongest smell. But the smell is like sticking to your hair and clothes. You buried your face in your arms, longing for the faint sweetness of the candles, the freshness of the grass, and even the pungent smoke of the fire. Anything is fine except this. In such an atmosphere, time is distorted. Minutes are like hours and hours are like days. You imagine fresh air as vividly as you imagine food. Imagine yourself standing on an open field, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of high-earned rain. You took a deep breath in your fantasy, but the dungeon pulled you back with another rotten lung. In despair, you began to hum softly, as if a tune could mask the scent. Rarely distract your attention. The person beside you moaned, annoyed by the sound. Silence returned, as heavy as air. Ultimately, fatigue can even dull your senses. Your body follows itself and no longer shrinks back with each breath. On the contrary, the smell became the background, always there, just like a second heartbeat. Perhaps this is the survival rule in these secret rooms. Not by resisting the pain, but by integrating it into yourself until it becomes a part of you. However, when you finally fall into a light and restless sleep, a thought lingers in your mind. What if you always carried a stench? What if even in freedom, the ghosts of mold, waste and decay linger on your skin? The dungeon teaches you that scents, like chains, can last longer than the night. Scratching before dawn will wake you up. At first you thought it was the chains moving or another prisoner moving in his sleep, but later you caught the rhythm. The tiny claws, sharp and ruthless, moved on the straw and stones. Have adapted to the darkness, and you see, a mouse as bold as a tax collector is sniffing around in the corner of your bed. Its whiskers were twitching. Its eyes sparkled slightly under the torchlight shining through the corridor. You froze even though you knew it wasn't fear that held you back. It's fatigue. Can't have the strength to drive it away. Existing records tell us that rodents were frequent visitors to medieval prisons. Rats thrive under the same conditions that destroy humans: dirty, damp, and with a large amount of rotten food residue. Prisoners often complain that animals do not just share this space. They claim their meals, ignore their clothes, and sometimes bite their fingers and toes at night. Living in a cell means living in a group that is half human and half rodent. However, there is a strange story in a German chronicle about a prisoner who made friends with mice and fed them breadcrumbs, so that the mice wouldn't bite him when he was sleeping. It is said that these animals have learned to gather quietly around him, just like a living fur blanket to resist the cold. Whether true or not, the story implies something profound. When loneliness and frost pressed it tightly, Even pests can become allies. You watched your mouse getting closer and closer to the straw, absurdly wondering if he would curl up beside you tonight. As for how the authorities view this pest, experts have different opinions. The prison guards regard rats as part of the punishment. Let the wild beast snarl at it. Others insist that these animals are inevitable. They are too numerous and too tenacious to be kept out of any building. During the archaeological excavation of the castle ruins, bones and feces of the Nords were even found in the ruins, demonstrating the stubbornness of their coexistence with humans. No matter which explanation you like, the effect is the same. You will never be alone, even when you desperately long for it. The mouse suddenly darted forward and sniffed at your ankle. You bastard! The iron chain creaked, and a guy screamed and vanished into the shadows, but the sound echoed, and more eyes blinked in the dark corner of the cell. You realize there's more than one. There are dozens, perhaps even more, all killing time. Their actions pierced through the silence until the dungeon was filled with the vitality of the secret society. Of course, the smell also joined in. The mouse carried its own musk, pungent yet simple, mixed with the rotten matter that had already seeped into its cells. It will produce a mixed smell that tights your stomach. You vomit quietly, not wanting to draw others' attention, but such an effort will only make you dizzy. Another prisoner was walking beside him. A mouse crawled over him and he cursed under a low voice. He kicked the straw and the iron chain jingled angrily. The mice scattered for a while, but soon came back. They know how to be patient, they know they are hungry. To some extent, you think they reflect the prisoners themselves. The cruel truth is right here. After several hours of trembling, you begin to understand their warm appeal. Imagine the story of Germany again. A prisoner sleeps under a fur quilt, and his tiny heart beats along with his own. Can you do it? Can you let them crawl over you? Crawling into your tattered cloth is old for warmth. You shook your head, feeling very disgusted. However, the longer you tremble, the longer this question lingers and refuses to disappear. The scraping is still going on, a persistent undercurrent. Your ears will turn along with it until it sounds as loud as a human voice. Sometimes you will hear short and sharp squeaks, almost as if you were having a conversation. You imagine mice whispering in your ear. They won't eat any part of you first, and you'll throw that part down at night. This idea was absurd, but exhaustion made it a reality. Historians are still struggling to figure out how the prisoners dealt with this kind of harassment. Some descriptions describe endless scratching and slapping. I couldn't sleep all night to protect my toes. Others, however, suggested that these people would no longer resist and allow the rats to crawl freely as long as they did not bite too hard. The lack of consensus reflects your own indecision. Resist and exhaust yourself, or surrender and preserve your strength. Neither feeling is like victory. Time passes quietly, not measured by the chimes but by the activities of mice. At some point, you heard a faint sound of ignoring the wood. They are biting something. Maybe it's the wooden board used to block the door. Perhaps it's not important at all. But, you're half-minus awake, half-minus asleep mind, you imagine them helping you dig a tunnel to escape. This is an absurd hope. But after all, it is a hope. In the end, fatigue prevailed. You close your eyes and know they are still there. You can hear their still sounds, their feet on the straw, their claws on the stones, and their teeth biting on the wood. But this sound becomes part of the night music, and your body falls asleep. You dreamed of the fields again, but this time the mice were running in the grass. Their beards brush your hands, and their warmth presses on your skin. Even in a dream, you can't escape. When you wake up, the dawn light can hardly pass through the narrow window. The mice have all retreated to the corner, leaving only scattered droppings at your feet. You sighed, half disgusted and half relieved. Another night passed. Another night spent with those creatures who knew nothing about kings and laws, only hunger and warmth. In this cell, they are equal to you. Perhaps, even though you will never admit it, they are your companions. Time may fade, but tonight, something different greets you. When the guard slammed the iron gate shut, he threw a tattered package into the straw. At first you thought it was waistcloth. But when you unfolded it, you realized it was a blanket, or at least a cruel imitation. This cloth is very wear-minus resistant. The edges have spread out and it smells as if it has passed through more than 10 cells before yourself. However, when your fingers touch the worn-minus outline, you will hold it tightly, because in such a dungeon, even the warm illusion will feel like a treasure. Written records from citizens' records confirm that prisoners rarely receive proper bedding. Sometimes they get nothing. When the pieces of cloth are passed down, they are usually old uniforms or discarded linen. The chronicles of the 14th century mentioned the coat of shame, the curtains stripped from those who were executed, which were recycled into coverings for the living. Imagine wrapping yourself in a dead man's coat, hoping that his scent will drive away the mice when you rest. This is the comfort that these leftovers offer. There is a strange anecdote circulating in Florence. It is said that a debtor imprisoned in the city prison sewed a quilt with fragments of parchment smuggled in by a friend. He endured the winter under this strange creation, sleeping beneath contracts, letters and hints written on sheepskin. This story might have been exaggerated, but the image lingers on. When there is no wool, paper can keep him warm. As for whether blankets were once a universal supply, scholars remain unsure. Some people have pointed out that the inventory list of prison stores includes textiles and food together. Others, however, believe that these lists reflect bribery or privilege rather than standard issues. Reality is vague, but your body knows the truth. No matter what one gets, it is never enough. When you derail the cloth over your shoulders, the first shock is how cold it is. It not only fails to insulate you from the air, but also traps moisture in your skin. You pull it tight, but its weave is too thin, and the airflow passes through directly like the wind. You still hold on to it tightly. Weight, no matter how faint, is something that can be grasped. Something that can make you believe to yourself that you are not completely exposed to nature. However, the smell is almost unbearable. Sweat will make you gentle, and darker things will adhere to every fiber. You bury your nose inside and then force yourself to continue. Another option is to surrender to the cold. Do you know what this means? Survival often boils down to choosing how long you can endure the pain. Tonight you choose the stench over frostbite. The other prisoners noticed your new luxury. Some people are jealous. Another person asked for a corner when the air current got worse. You hesitated for a moment, then shared, stretching the blanket very thin and turning it into a spider web between you two. This warmth can be disregarded, but this gesture establishes an unspoken alliance. In a cell where even breathing seemed like a competition, a piece of cloth turned into the currency of trust. As the night deepened, you kept moving beneath the tattered cloth. No position is correct. The blanket slips off your shoulders, wraps around your ankles, or sticks wet to your chest. Each adjustment can only bring temporary relief. However, you have been making adjustments all along because this kind of behavior itself can prevent despair. You are doing something to fight against the cold, though in vain. Historians debate whether such thin coverings are symbolic rather than practical. Some people think that they represent kindness and prove that the jailers have not completely abandoned humanity. Others, however, believe that this is strategic, keeping the captives alive but weak, maintaining a balance on the blade between survival and collapse. No matter what their intentions are, you can clearly sense the symbolic meaning within. This rag reminds you that you can suffer, but you can't die too quickly. The cloth wiped the ears, and the sounds of the night seemed even sharper. You can hear the howling of the through wind, the groans of prisoners curled up in the corner, and the continuous wailing of rats. Every sound blends with the shrill sound of the fabric moving as you toss and turn. It turned into a rhythm, a shrill lullaby, and you couldn't help but fall into a light sleep. But sleep brings about ironic dreams. You imagine yourself wrapped in velvet, enjoying a sumptuous feast at a noble dining table, only to be awakened by the soreness and stench of the blanket. You dreamed that the sun was warming the linen sheet hanging in the wind, but when you opened your eyes, you saw the wet cloth stuck to it like a leaf. Even in your mind, the dungeon will take back the little bit of comfort you stole. At dawn, the cloth was soaked through with your sweat. It sticks tightly together just like the water in a swamp wrapped around your body. You peeled it off and held it an arm's length away. For a moment, you wanted to throw it away completely. But when the wind blows over your bare shoulders, you grab it back and press it onto your skin once again. This is the last lesson this rag gives you. In the dungeon, comfort is relative. What annoys you tonight might save you tomorrow. What makes you vomit may also keep your heart beating. As long as you breathe in the mist and the cold air, you will wrap yourself in anything, no matter how dirty it is, as long as it brings a little warmth. You think you've got used to the pace of these nights, but the seasons always have a way to rewrite every rule. Tonight, winter has completely taken over the dungeon. The feeling of cold is different, sharper and hungrier. Not only does it crawl into your bones, but it also pierces through them, as if every gust of wind carries a knife. You curled up under the tattered blanket, your knees pressed tightly against your chest, your teeth still chattering no minus stop, and you were worried that they would crack. Chroniclers have left behind a wealth of testimony about how seasons changed prison life. In summer, the prison cell turned into a suffocating stove, with heat trapped by stones and the air filled with illness. In winter, they turn into iceboxes, and breathing can be seen in the air, forming clouds that never disperse. Some people even claim that in the particularly harsh winter, when prisoners wake up, frost sticks to their eyebrows and beards, as if the night has painted them into statues. You stroked your face with your fingers, hoping to feel the formation of crystals there. A particularly strange note appeared in the records of 15th-century London prisons. The frost was beating us. The implication is very simple. Since the weather itself can solve this problem, why punish the captives? Thinking of this, you laughed in pain, and your breath curled up like smoke in front of you. However, scholars still disagree on whether the builders of the Middle Ages understood how cruel these seasonal changes were. Some people think that castles focused too much on thick walls, arrow crevices and deep vaults for defense, and have never considered comfort. Others, however, believe that the pain brought about by temperature changes is regarded as part of the punishment, an invisible flogging imposed by the climate itself. And your frozen toes lying here are the evidence. You moved again, but the straw beneath your feet had frozen stiff. Legs like glass and bites into your skin. You long for warmth, but every surface, stone, straw, iron, has become an accomplice to the cold. Even your own body has betrayed you, trembling violently, unusing energy that you did not replace. Hunger made the situation worse. Without fuel, trembling will turn into weakness, and weakness will become a more dangerous state of stillness than sleep. The voices around you are telling their own seasonal stories. The prisoners now cough more frequently, and the fleas that freeze almost as soon as they land are cut off. And every breath was a struggle. The mouse seemed bolder as well, perhaps in urgent need of leftovers. In such a harsh climate, you can hear them gazing at the wood with new enthusiasm, and their screams are sharper and crazier. When you think of summer, you almost smile. Then, the cell was filled with a foul smell. Every prisoner was drenched in sweat and every breath was accompanied by heavy flies. Do you still remember the complaints of the chronicles? The cells were as hot as ovens, and the prisoners desperately licking the condensate on the walls to relieve their boredom. The contrast is astonishing. This place is sometimes hot and sometimes cold. No one can survive for long. On a certain night in August, people are willing to trade everything for a breath of cool air. Now it's December, and you'll do whatever it takes to endure the scorching heat of summer. This is the cruel symmetry in the dungeon. You always long for what you can lose and will never find balance. Some historians have suggested that prisoners develop their own rituals to deal with these extreme situations. Take turns to sleep so that the body's heat will rotate or accumulate together, just like soldiers gathered around a campfire. From the letters smuggled from the Beta prison, it can be seen that people huddled back together not out of friendship, but for survival. This approach might have saved lives, but it has also blurred the boundaries of dignity. Imagine that you hold a stranger tightly, not because you want to do so, but because being frostbitten to death makes you feel closer than shame. The man beside you moved a little and slowly walked towards you. At first you weren't Erdis, but then you felt his shoulder resting on yours, radiating a faint warmth. You won't resist. Neither of you spoke, but his gesture conveyed something that words couldn't express. We're all striving to survive the severe cold. There is no place for pride here. Our stretch. Your body stops trembling. This scares you more than shivering, because you've heard stories of people freezing to death when they thought the cold had finally eased. A tenderness that falls into silence. You put your arms, rub your thighs, and do anything to keep the blood circulating. Even pain seemed to have triumphed over numbness. Modern researchers hold different views on the prevalence of exposure deaths within castles. Some people believe that hunger and disease kill more captives than climate does. Some people also pointed out the mass graves near the old prison, indicating that winter had wiped out entire cells within just a few weeks. The truth, as always, is uncertain. But on this cold and silent night, statistics are not important. Your survival range narrates to the next breath, the next tremble, and the next stubborn decision not to give up. Finally, a faint ray of light slowly passed through the gap of the arrow. Dawn is approaching, pale and gloomy, but still a promise. The frost on the wall was flickering slightly. You straightened up with every joint protesting. You realized that you had endured another rainy winter night. But deep down in your heart, you know that this kind of survival is temporary. The cold will return tonight and every night after, until spring. Even then, relief will only mean the suffocating heat of summer. You are trapped in a place where the season is not a blessing but a new form of punishment. Every change in the weather rewrites your pain with new ink. You curled up in the straw, breathing in the still misty air, and whispered to yourself, "Be patient." This sentence echoed on the stone, a fragile incantation, almost a prayer. And because in this dungeon, patience is your only weapon. The guard will push you into a new room. At first, you were too dizzy to notice the difference. The door slammed shut, the iron chain scratched, and then your eyes adjusted. This is neither a drip pit in the underground city, nor a makeshift cell in the corridor. The walls here are smooth, painted and decorated with faded tapestries. The fireplace in the corner was yawning, and the embers were still faintly glowing. For a moment, you doubted whether you had been released, but no, the iron fence was still shining at the door. You didn't escape from prison. You have strayed into another world, the prison of the rich. Records from the Middle Ages clearly show that the experience of being imprisoned was not equal. Wealthy prisoners of war, noble hostages or politically important captives usually sleep relatively comfortably. Feathers, cushions, and sometimes even servants served them. They are of great value. After all, the ransom demands that they survive. The chronicles of France record knights captured in battle, who were imprisoned in furnished rooms. Their only humiliation was the loss of freedom, not warmth. There is a nearly comical detail in the court records of Burgundy. A captured nobleman complained not about the chains or the straw, but about the poor-quality wine at the dinner. His grievances were serious, he recorded, as if the bad year was a reasonable kind of pain. You chuckled in a low voice, half because of the pain and half because it was absurd to compare that person's complaint with the filth you endured. Experts are still debating just how common this extravagant captivity is. Some people think that noble prisoners are exceptions. Their treatment was recorded precisely because it was extraordinary. Others, however, believe that this is the standard practice of the elite class, reflecting a society in which hierarchy even determines the quality of your prison bed. The truth lies in the shadows. However, there is still too much evidence of feather beds, roaring fireplaces, and books provided to captives that cannot be ignored. Is it carefully on the bed provided here, a real one stuffed with feathers? The size of the mattress is below your weight, so soft that your body almost forgets. In an instant, you felt a great sense of relief. Your painful joint is sinking. Your original skin welcomes you without straw. Though rougher than that of a true noble, is thick and warm. Compared with the tattered clothes in the dungeon, this feels like being trapped in a dream. But this kind of comfort is disturbing. You can't help but think of other men and women, frozen on stones, ignored by rats, panting in filth. Their pain echoes in your memory. Suddenly the tenderness in your heart almost feels ashamed. It whispers of privilege and fortune, and reminds people that even in chains, society can divide the people. The flames crackled faint but real. For the first time in weeks, you saw the light dancing on the wall. Smoke rose gently, and you greedily took a puff. It smells like wood, not waste, nor decay. Wit does not refresh for its sweetness. Your toe gradually thaws and feels a tingling sensation as it recovers. You stuffed them under the blanket, not daring to let the warmth leave, not daring to believe that it would last. The guard came back once, carrying a tray of rough bread. Yes, but the bread had not been gnawed by pests first. A glass of wine with water added. You ate in silence. Every bite reminds you that you have been pushed into a different category, a prisoner at stake with his life and death. Perhaps you are useful. Perhaps your name carries great weight. Perhaps some powerful person wants you to live. No matter what the reason is, it can bring you a relatively peaceful night. However, the peace you also has its own thorns. You can hear footsteps upstairs, the laughter of court officials, and the sound of chairs rubbing against the shiny floor. Life goes on above your head, reminding you that your gilded prison is still a cage. Imagine the nobleman upstairs complaining about the ventilation problem, and you, strictly speaking, a prisoner, powdered around the stove like a VIP. The irony is stronger than half. Researchers point out that this kind of privileged confinement sometimes softens prisoners into collaborators. If the treatment is good, they are more likely to sign treaties, disclose secrets, or swear allegiance. Others, on the contrary, believe that excessive comfort prolongs their pain, allowing them to live long enough to witness humiliation. No matter what the motive is, it is obvious that extravagant imprisonment has never been purely out of goodwill. This is a strategy wrapped in velvet. You lay there staring at the ceiling. The bed is too soft. It will cause your back to hurt in new ways. You are restless, as if your body doesn't trust ease. Sleep came reluctantly. The clicking of chains and the rustling of straw kept playing in your mind, as if comfort itself had become suspicious. Perhaps this is the final cruelty, reminding you of what warmth feels like, just to make you afraid of losing it tomorrow. The dreams have returned, but they are confusing. You pass through a castle. Some of the rooms are dungeons and some are banquet halls. You slide from straw to velvet, from rags to robes, then able to tell which is the true fate. The dream melted in the firelight. When you woke up, there was sweat on your forehead, even though the air was still cold. At dawn, the embers in the fireplace had cooled down. It's cold in the room again, though not as merciless as the pit you know. You sit on the bed with a blanket over your shoulders, realizing that even in a relatively comfortable environment, imprisonment can distort everything. The warm feeling is like betrayal. The taste of food makes one feel guilty, and rest makes you more tired than before. Luxury is not a gift. It is another chain that is softer, heavier and perhaps harder to break. Once the guards drag you back to the branches and leaves of the castles, the comfortable down mattress will soon fade from memory. Going down the mountain itself is dizzying. The light of the torches flickered on the spiral stone staircase. The air was getting colder and colder. The laughter, music and even footsteps from the upper world all vanished into silence. Finally, the door opened and you were pushed into a cell directly beneath the guard room. It can be seen from the noise above. Every piece of wood, every pair of boots, and every die rubbing against the table was filtered through the cracks. The floor above turns into a continuous sound ceiling, reminding you that even if you tremble below, your life goes on. You lay on the straw, your eyes fixed upwards, listening to people laughing at jokes you couldn't hear. The cups jingled and the chairs brushed against the wooden boards. Their heat pressed down on you, audible but intangible. Documents from medieval prisons confirm that many cells were located directly beneath the guard rooms. Such an arrangement is very practical and easy to supervise. Once they escape, they can quickly enter. Moreover, it makes the prisoners hear about the distant free world, which is even more cruel. For instance, in the Tower of London, In the cells beneath the poach ant tower, the constant chatter of guards, the clinking of sharpened weapons and the sound of dice rolling could be heard. The building itself ensures that the prisoners always live in a state of audible jealousy. There is a strange story in a French castle about a person who claimed that he could tell the time by the sounds in the guardroom. He knew that the chair would scrape against the backrest at dawn and was getting ready for the early shift. Rail in the cup would rattle at noon. He knew that at midnight the dice would clatter for the last time, and then silence would fall. On days without sunlight, the pace of the jailer became his schedule. Imagine yourself developing the same skill, with your ears upturned like a monk, following the invisible chimes of a monastery. As for whether this is intentional cruelty or merely for convenience, scholars still have differences of opinion. Some people believe that this design serves as a better reminder of power to captives than forcing them to hear the laughter of the guards when they are frozen. Others, however, believe that this is merely a logistical issue, with almost no choice regarding the layout of the castle. No matter which way it is, the result is the same. Your nights are not troubled by silence, but by the reminder that warmth and comfort are right above their heads, not by their existence for you. The taste here is different again. The air was not filled with a pure musty smell, but with the smoke wafting down from the fire in the dark room. It blends with the stench of your cell to form a cool perfume, half comfortable and half filthy. When the grilled meat drifts out through the cracks, your stomach growls and you almost mock the absurdity of hunger caused by the smell you'll never taste. You moved on the straw, but the footsteps of the boots above drowned out your own movements. The ceiling seemed to be filled with footsteps. With each bang, it reminds us that blood and food warm our bodies. You close your eyes, but the noise still lingers, pressing down on your skull like an unwelcome lullaby. Time passed hour by hour, measured by the constantly changing sounds in the guard room. At a certain moment, the song of the board of directors began to play. The melody pierces through the stone, deep and lasting. You find yourself humming involuntarily, and the tune echoes strangely in your darkroom. For a moment, you feel as if you have returned to this living world, until the rhythmic stomping and laughter follow, reminding you that the singers above will never share their warmth with the trembling people below. The psychological weight of these sounds has not been overlooked by modern researchers. Some people believe that hearing about a life that is so close yet so far away will intensify despair and is more likely to cause a person to break down than isolation. Others, however, believe that it provides a clue of connection to prevent the captives from going completely insane. This ambiguity has always been there, just like your own complex emotions. When you lie awake in bed, struggling between the comfort and the noise and the torment and the rejection it represents, at some point in the night, silence finally descended. No laughter, no jingling cups. You hold your breath. A sound without sound is louder than the noise itself. Then a forest by a small stream interrupted me, as if someone was still awake. You pricked up your ears, wondering if only God was also listening to you, knowing that you were listening to him. This thought makes you uneasy. Were you a prisoner or an object of entertainment? You curled up even tighter, pressing your ears against the straw to cover the world above your head. But even through layer upon layer of cloth, the sound can still reach your ears. You realize that there is no true silence here, only a chorus of constantly changing reminders. The guard room will never leave you, even if the person above is asleep. Their weight is clumping in the woods, their fire is smoldering, and their presence is lingering. In this way, the night passed, not in loneliness, not in silence, but in the endless awareness of others' comfort. Yet you were out of reach. You learned to measure time, not by the tolling of bells, nor by the light, but by the boots treading on the planks and the laughter coming from the cracks. Satire is sharp. You are imprisoned in the darkness. However, the lives of your captives shine every hour. At dawn, the guards above started moving again. The chair is scraping backward. The cup dropped down with a bang. Their day has begun, just as yours will never end. You stiffly rose from the straw bed, your eyes fixed on the ceiling, realizing that you had been listening all night to footsteps that you could never keep up with. You think the sound in the guard room is the worst music you can think of. But tonight, the castle proved you wrong. Once the torches went out, the corridor above fell silent, and another sound began to fill the darkness. At first it was very faint, and an uneven groan came from somewhere in the hall. Then, when your ears become sharp, the entire dungeon turns into a theater, filled with voices, songs, sobs, prayers, curses, and the shrill sound of iron chains dragging on the stones. The textual description of medieval prisons shows that nights were rarely quiet. The prison was crowded with people of all backgrounds: soldiers, thieves, debtors, heretics, beggars, and even children, each bringing their own voice of pain. The chroniclers of Florence noticed that from the streets outside, the prison near Ponte Vizio could be heard, with its wailing and wailing passing through the windows like a grotesque lullaby. Tonight you'll understand what's going on, because the walls themselves seem to be breathing sounds as well. A particularly strange anecdote originated from the Spaniards in the 15th century. A prison guard reported that the prisoners had once tried to sing hymns together to drown out their despair. The guard called it mockery, but a monk insisted that it was proof that faith had survived in the darkness. Listen carefully now. Swear you've heard a similar sound. Two men murmured a tune that might be prayer or a prank, and gradually became harmonious before a cough. As for whether this kind of night-time chorus was tolerated or suppressed, historians are still striving to find evidence. Some people believe that as long as it does not threaten escape, prison guards are allowed to make noise, and it is best for prisoners to exhaust themselves by shouting. Others believe that anyone who sings or moans too loudly will be severely beaten. The truth cannot be corrected. You only know that your own night is pierced by the sounds you can't escape. The air vibrates with the layers of sound. And Nan was muttering to himself endlessly in the corner, his words going over and over again until they blurred into nonsense. Another child was calling his mother, his voice intermittent, heart, minus-wrenching. From somewhere above, you heard a faint Latin chant. Perhaps he was a monk, or perhaps just another captive who repeated a fragment of the scripture. These sounds overlap until your brain starts weaving them into strange rhythms. The desperate choir echoed in the damp corridor. You moved the straw in, trying to block it, but the sound still followed you. Every groan and creak as the chain seems to be directed at you. You cover your ears with your hands. However, the stone amplified every sound. Even the silence between tears feels like a pause in music, waiting for the next painful melody. The damp and rotten smell mingled with the sound, creating a comprehensive attack on the senses. Every SOB seemed to release another stench, as if sadness itself had a certain smell. Your breath is shallow, but it still sticks to you. Then laughter pierced through the pain. It will shock you and suddenly pop up from anywhere. Someone found incredible humor here. The laughter was high, intermittent and almost crazy, but it was still spreading, reverberating in the corridor, sounding like a chorus. You feel your lips twitching. Is it contagion, despair, or is there really something funny about this shared misfortune? The laughter vanished as quickly as it began, leaving behind such a heavy silence that you almost missed the wailing. Modern researchers often notice the psychological impact of this soundscape. Constant noise disrupts sleep, wears down nerves and erodes reason. Some people believe that the noise in the dungeon itself is a form of torture, depriving prisoners of their rest time, even if they are not bound by chains. Others, however, believe that the sound reminds the prisoners that they are not alone, and the shared pain is a fragile comfort. Now listen, and you will simultaneously sense two explanations. Comfort and torment are inseparably intertwined. Several hours passed. The melody of the song of pain fluctuates from time to time, rising and falling like the tide. Once, a deep and loud voice began to sing a ballad about a defeated battle, and his verses drowned out the noise. Close your eyes and let the melody wash over you. For a moment, it felt as if I were sitting by the fireplace, listening to a poet reciting. Then the man coughed up blood and the illusion was shattered. The night ended with exhaustion rather than silence. The voice weakens gradually into snoring, moaning, or the body becomes strangely still, and may never move again. You lay awake in bed, your ears ringing, lingering for a long time even after the sound stopped. When the guard opened the door at dawn and the light shone in, you realized that you had spent another night, not in the darkness but in the symphony of hue and suffering. The cruelest thing is, you know you will still hear it tomorrow and the night after tomorrow, until the echo lingers in your mind forever. Your stomach has been growling for several days. But tonight, because of the smell, the feeling of hunger was even stronger. Somewhere in the castle kitchen, a grand feast is being prepared. The air current passing through the arrow gap carried the whispers of grilled meat and oats. That aroma that once signified celebration, here it's torture. You close your eyes and try to focus your attention on something else, but that fragrance still lingers around your ribs, like a cruel reminder that you are starving. Records from medieval prisons show no fear of prisoners' rations. Bread often gets smolder. When it gets wet, it sometimes turns slightly salty. Occasionally, a girl as thin as a spoon. Citizens' records in Paris show that the food in the prison was merely bread crusts collected from the market. British chroniclers complain that debtors can only go hungry unless food is sent by friends or family. Hunger is no accident. This is a kind of design. The prisoner should have been alive, but could only barely survive. An unusual note comes from a Milan record of the 14th century. A man who was imprisoned for theft said that every night he would dream of a banquet where he once worked as a kitchen handyman. He swore that the smell wafting into his cell was more vivid than any illusion and claimed that when hungry, he imagined himself cooking for you. Now you lie here, drooling over the phantom taste, and you fully understand what he means. Historians debate whether hunger is regarded as a punishment or simply ignored. Some people believe that deliberate rationing is a way to weaken captives and prevent them from escaping. It has also been pointed out that there is evidence suggesting that prison guards embezzle food expenses for their own benefit, leaving prisoners to fend for themselves. This problem remains unsolved, but your stomach doesn't care about motivation. It roared desperately. You curled up even tighter under that tattered blanket, trying to ignore the pain. The straw beneath your feet rustled, and you imagined its crust, golden and crispy. You imagined putting them in your mouth and chewing them slowly. On the contrary, what your hand holds is only a brittle stem shattered into dust. You are so disappointed that your throat hurts. Around you, other prisoners are muttering to themselves in their sleep. Some were shouting loudly for food. People repeated the word bread as if reciting a spell. Another one moaned cheese, cheese, until his voice turned into snoring. Hunger not only torments the body. It lingers in my mind and invades my dreams until it in sleep can no longer offer shelter. You recall the meals that you once took for granted. Aster boiling over the fire. The aroma of onions and herbs. A bread crust hot enough to steam. The butter melts into the small holes of the dough. The scene comes uninvited and is clearer than reality itself. It bit your lip to prevent saliva from flowing out, but it was no use. Hunger occupies every corner of your imagination. Some modern researchers have proposed that hunger in prisons is not only corporal punishment, but also psychological warfare. By making the prisoners weak, the prison guards ensured that their willpower was broken down. Hungry people are easier to control, more likely to bargain and more likely to curse. Others countered that many prisons are too poor to provide more services. Both of these explanations make sense. But, in your mind, theory makes no sense. Pain is the only fact. You try to distract yourself with the noise around you. Rats scurried around, water droplets fell, and chains jingled. Under normal circumstances, these sounds would be annoying, but now you welcome them. As long as it can drown out the roar in your stomach, that's fine. However, even mice can be more effective in reminding you that they will find leftovers in corners that you can reach. A person walked past quickly holding a crumb of bread in his hand, but the chain on your ankle blocked you. The mouse disappeared successfully. Resistance in hours. Your hunger intensifies into nausea and then weakens into severe pain. You know these stages. The first night was very painful. The second, weakness. The third kind is dangerous silence. You rubbed your arms and kept moving forward, deceiving yourself into believing that you still had strength. Then a prisoner began to hum softly. At first you thought it was another hymn, but soon the melody formed the lyrics he sang about food, fragrant wine, sweet apple. Others moaned and tried to stop him, but his voice stubbornly continued. Strangely enough, this will make you feel comforted. You are immersed in the singing, imagining this grand feast as if it were real. Hunger turned the cruel lullaby into comfort. Ultimately, your body is forced to rest. The dream came very quickly. In the dream, the word Abel's filled with food. Use it by your head and keep eating. Every bite melts as soon as it touches your tongue. The dream turned into ridicule. You chew and swallow, but you will never feel full. When you woke up, your teeth were biting straw and your chin was aching from the illusory feast. When the pale light of dawn pierced through the crevices, you roll slowly, weaker than before. But your determination is strangely stronger. But it has also left your mark. You whispered to yourself, sound hoarse, live on. This sentence is louder than the gurgling in your stomach. Because in this cell, hunger is not merely a matter of food. This is telling you that even your own body cannot be trusted. Hunger is another jailer, always keeping watch and always waiting. Tonight you realize that it has become your closest companion. The hunger from last night won't subside. It makes your awareness of every stone, every air current, and every sound more acute. But the strongest thing tonight is not your stomach. It's your thoughts. You lie on the damp floor and can't fall asleep. Your mind won't calm down. You begin to plan your escape, as if imagining freedom could warm your body. The medieval chronicles mentions countless failed escapes. Some people tried to bribe the guards with coins hidden in their boots. Others, however, lined up smuggled metal fragments on locks. Several people were digging tunnels, scraping back and forth on the stones and soil with spoons, bones, and even bare hands. Most people were soon caught. The entrance collapsed and the guards became suspicious. However, it was precisely the planned act that gave the prisoners a reason to live on, giving them a reason to live one more night. You also began to whisper in your mind and draw up blueprints in the shadows. There is a peculiar story circulating in the records of a German town in the 14th century. It is said that a man smeared bacon oil on his wooden door to train rats to bite it. For several weeks, he fed them leftovers until the door weakened at last, and then he could sneak in. Whether the tale is exaggerated or not, this idea is intoxicating. You look at the creatures running around your cell and wonder if they are allies or enemies. Experts hold different opinions on how common escape behaviors are in large castles. Some people believe that the thickness of the walls and the vigilance of the guards have made most plans futile, turning fantasies into night-time pastimes. Others, however, insist that the number of absences is higher than what the records show because the authorities are too ashamed to admit defeat. Now, this debate is of no consequence to you. What's important is that every time you trace the outline of your chain, that faint flame of possibility will burn fiercely. Pull the iron again. The jingling sound had an echo, but you carefully measured its length. If you stretch, can you reach the wall? Can you use the edge of the chain to chisel a mortar? Thinking of this, your fingers itch. You imagine scratching night after night, as patient as a drop of water, until the stone falls. Your body has incorporated fantasy. Every air current becomes a secret air passage. Each mouse hole turned into an entrance to a tunnel. The sound of dripping water sounds like a clock counting down until freedom. You close your eyes and see yourself crawling on the ground, emerging in the moonlight. The lungs inhale fresh air without any musty smell. Ran barefoot across the frosty grassland. The chains are still dragging, but the heart is running towards freedom. Then a cough broke the curse. A prisoner at the other end of the room said with a wry smile in a low voice, "No one is allowed to leave." His words were bone-minus chilling than the cold. You know he has seen others try, seen them fail, and perhaps seen them hanged as a warning. Fantasy may darken, but it will never die out. For without it, the night has nothing but despair. The air has become colder. You press that blanket over your shoulder, and images of tunnels, bribes and disguises still emerged in your mind. Imagine knocking a guard unconscious with a stone and stealing his keys. You can imagine bribing him by promising him gold hidden far away. You imagine miracles, angels, and even the earth itself opening up, allowing you to climb freely. Modern researchers describe this kind of dream as a spiritual existence. They believed the captive survived not by physical strength, but by the power of imagination. Some prisoners scrawled poems on the wall. Some people carved boats or animals into stones, turning fantasies into art. Without such a vision, monotonous suffering might devour them faster than hunger. You groped your fingers along the wall, looking for soft plaster. If you scratch once or twice, dust will fall into your nails. This feels like victory, although you know it's nothing. But you still kept grasping, as if every grain that slipped away was a step towards daylight. Rhythm calms you down and gives your restless thoughts a purpose. Sleep refuses to come. You tinker, move, grab, plan. The guard room above makes a slight noise, reminding you of those who hold the keys. Imagine their laughter again, and this image provides the impetus for your plot. In your imagination, revenge and escape are intertwined. One day, you will think of me as the one laughing above your head, while they are shivering with cold below. But in the end, no miracle came at dawn. Still hungry, still cold. There are only faint scratches on the wall, which no one can see except you. However, this tiny mark makes people feel very precious. This is the evidence of your resistance, not by strength but by hope. The night has taught you some cruel but important things. Forward is the only guarantee of escape for prisoners. As long as you keep dreaming of tunnels, mice, or even impossible miracles, you carry the sparks that the dungeon cannot steal. The cold is terrifying enough. The hunger is cruel enough. But nothing can compare to that night when you know tomorrow might be the last day. The news soon spread throughout the prison that someone would be executed at dawn. Whispers passed through the crevices and corridors, reaching your ears. Then I suddenly understood. This is you. From that moment on, sleep became a stranger. You lay on the straw, listening to your rapid breathing. The cell felt tighter than before. The stone was pressed in, and the iron chain felt even heavier. Every drop of water sounded like the ticking of a clock. What traps you is not only the wall but also time itself. Contemporary records tell us that the eve of execution was deliberately cruel. Some prisoners were confined in the dark, deprived of food and forced to ponder their own destinies. The others paraded through the streets before the other captives, which was a cruel warning to those awaiting them. The records of the Tower of London describe how death row inmates were transferred to colder and deeper cells on their last night. The cold itself is like a wordless rehearsal for the grave. You lean against the sconce and realize that this is what the room feels like, a rehearsal. The story of a bean man has been passed down. It was reported that a man who was about to be hanged sang all night long. His singing echoed throughout the prison until the prison guards pleaded with him to stop. He refused, claiming that he hoped his last memory would be his own songs, not their silence. You wonder if you should do the same, but your throat feels dry and your courage is thinner than parchment. Historians are still debating how many captives were warned in advance. Some people believe that prisoners know their fate several days in advance and endure long termed psychological torture. Others, however, believe that executions are usually unexpected and occur suddenly without prior notice to prevent anyone from fleeing. Uncertainty makes the experience worse. Tonight you know, and this is no harder than hunger, but each pose will remind you of the morning. The feeling of lying flat is just like a corpse. Rolling up feels like begging. Sitting up will make you dizzy, as if the rope has already squeezed your neck. Your imagination has betrayed you. Every wooden stream is a scaffold under construction. The rustling of the wheat tocsin, the footsteps of the executioner. It's getting colder and colder in the cell, but you don't know if it's the night or your own fear. You held onto the tattered blanket tightly, covering your head like a child. But the darkness within was even worse. Your breathing got hot under the cloth. You threw it away but hit it even harder. Nothing can keep you away from tomorrow. Around you, other prisoners are also restless. Some people prayed in low voices. Some soft encouragement that you don't believe. Others remain silent, unwilling to admit your fate. Their voices are like a chorus of ghosts, and you realize that you will soon join them, not as a physical body, but as a memory. Time passes slowly, but it no longer matters. But fantasy makes you feel stupid. Your mind always revolves around the rope, the blade, the flame, and any ending that awaits you. You can imagine a crowd, their faces all longing to see the scene. You imagine the priest's last words being drowned out by your own heartbeat. Modern researchers point out that insomnia among death row inmates is almost a common phenomenon. Few prisoners sleep before execution, and those who do sleep will wake up screaming from nightmares. Someone left graffiti, names, present desperate sketches on the cell wall. Archaeologists have discovered these final scratches carved on the stone by nails or broken pottery. You glanced at the wall, also wanting to make a mark on it, but your hand was shaking too hard to etch. On the contrary, you press your palm flat on the cold surface, leaving only the memory of your touch. The mouse is still running around. The air current is still groaning. The musty smell and the stench of waste still linger. But you'll hardly notice them tonight. The real prison is your own mind, leaping between fear and obedience. You'll imagine running away, but the chains hold you back. But weakness won. You imagine surrendering, and this thought scares you the most. At some point you realize that dawn is approaching. Somehow, the air brightened, and a faint gray seeped through the arrow's crevices. Each one a fragile treasure. Everyone is reminding you that you are still here and haven't left yet. When the door finally opened, the boots pounced on you. But didn't stand up. You are too cold to weaken to sensitive. The guard looked at your expression with perplexing pity, contempt and weariness. He doesn't speak and doesn't need to speak. The sound of the key in the lock tells you that's enough. The night offers you no rest, only endless rehearsals of death. When the chains are untied from your ankles, you realize that the cell itself has already done half of the execution's work. The night after an execution always carries a different weight. Whether you were dragged away or left behind, the dungeon itself seemed to have changed. The air became thicker and the violence deeper. Tonight, you're still here, but the shadows you witnessed with your own eyes or narrowly escaped still linger on your skin. The pressure of the cold is greater. You wonder if the fear itself makes you feel colder than usual. Medieval chronicle reports often describe diseases spreading like wildfire in these places. Due to frostbite, malnutrition and untreated wounds, the captives will soon have a fever. Seldom go to prison. Therapists believe that they are breeding grounds for infectious diseases. A British monk wrote, entering a prison, every breath is like inhaling death. You coughed into your sleeve, wondering if he was exaggerating, but the burning sensation in your chest indicated otherwise. There is a terrifying little story from Italy about a doctor who was bribed to examine prisoners in winter. He declared that they were beyond redemption, but before that, he had received payment from everyone. A few weeks later, he was found dead of a high fever that he had once ridiculed. This story has a hint of irony, as if suggesting that the curse of the dungeon will not spare arrogance. Now when you think of him, you almost laugh, even though your lips are cracked from the cold. Experts still disagree on how deliberate this neglect is. Some people believe that the authorities are really afraid of infection and have avoided close contact. Others, however, believe that the lack of care is purposeful. It is another layer of punishment within a system that is not designed to completely kill men, but to gradually torment them. The evidence is insufficient, but you don't need a scroll to confirm the truth. You can tell from the faces of the people around you. The shackles on the ankle of the person on your left have worn off the skin. Every time he moved, he shrank back, but no one took care of him. Another person kept going down without end. He was coughing very wet and shivering, all over with a fever. The straw around him was soaked with sweat. No one came forward to help. Touching him might also cause the same pain. In this place, sympathy is a luxury that only a few can afford. You tighten your tattered bra even tighter, but the chill still seeps into your bones. Your fingers are painful, stiffened red, and your nails are black due to bruising. You try rubbing and blowing, but nothing can stop the numbness. Somewhere deep in your heart, you know that the boundary between cold and hot is very thin. One slip a long night without shivering, you can get through it. The stench is even stronger tonight. Disease has its own smell, sour, metallic and heavy. It mixed with the rotten flesh that had already seeped into the walls until the air was filled with a toxic smell. You turned your face away, but the smell was as thick as mist. You want to know if breathing itself is contagious. You want to know if you also cough in the morning. Modern historians debate the mortality rate of this environment. Some people believe that most of the captives held on for several weeks before falling ill. Others insist that if luck or bribery can bring a little comfort, survival often lasts for several years. But your body does not. Pain, coughing, and endless colds all clearly tell you how fragile the thread of life has become. You think of the remedy you once knew. Hot soup, clean bandages, and bed soaked in water. You vividly imagine them, the fragrance of rosemary, the heat of thyme. Imagine your hands wrapped in fine linen with flames burning at your feet. These fantasies bring fleeting comfort, but they also intensify despair. There is no such thing here, but no one will come. A prisoner beside you is praying to Saint Rush, the patron saint of the plague. His voice was weakened, every word was hoarse, but he stubbornly repeated it over and over again. Listen, and let the rhythm of his pleading soothe your soul. Perhaps prayer works, or perhaps not, but in the absence of meditation, repetition itself becomes a form of treatment. You close your eyes, but the voice of the disease won't let you rest. Coughing sounds, breathing sounds, the body twisting in discomfort, and iron chains rubbing against each other. Every noise carries the weight of death. You tossed and turned restlessly, knowing that in such a symphony of illness, you would never fall asleep. At some point in the night, the man with the fever fell silent. The silence around him was deafening. You don't need to check. You can feel it in the air. Another corpse is waiting for the guards to tow away tomorrow morning. Another soul that was swallowed up by the dungeon without any ritual. Lying there staring into the darkness, you realize that the distance between you and him was so small. It's only a few degrees warm. It's just that the breathing is not yet rapid. And the one night survived instead of surrendering. Knowledge is as heavy as the chains around your ankles. You whispered to yourself, be patient. One more night. But deep down in your heart, you know that in this place, survival is not measured by strength and courage. Its measure is luck, the sudden win of illness, and the tenacious will of the body to keep shivering in the cold. And tonight, the shiver felt very weak. The cell door creaked open again. This time, the guards pushed in a figure so small that at first glance one might mistake it for a bundle of rags. Only when the shape changes into S or becomes out do you realize that it's a child. The boy was staggering forward barefoot, no more than 12 years old, perhaps even younger. His eyes were wide open as he scanned the shadows, and you could see the bright red of his feet on the frozen stones. Before he could turn around, the door slammed shut with a bang, the sound echoing like a verdict. Chroniclers from Newgate in London and Chater in Paris both mentioned that there were children among the prisoners. Some people were caught for stealing a piece of bread, a chicken, or a piece of cloth. Others are merely the sons or daughters of debtors, trapped with their parents who are unable to repay their debts. In many records, there is no difference between the elderly and the young. The cells absorbed them all. Tonight, you will see the reality reflected in the trembling boy holding his knee. There is a strange story circulating in the municipal records of Lübeck. A jailer noticed that children sometimes became the playthings of the guards. They would throw the leftovers to them as if they were feeding dogs, smiling as they watched their little hands struggle on the dirty straw. You glanced at the boy and could almost hear the cruel laughter behind the door. Modern researchers debate whether such imprisonment is common or rare. Some people claim that children often escape the harshest conditions, being held in solitary confinement or released to relatives. Others insist that overcrowding forces everyone, regardless of age, to gather together. When you watched the boy trembling on the straw on which you slept, The argument no longer mattered to you. Lice were already crawling towards his bare skin. He curled up in the wall, burying his face in his arms. Instinctively, you wanted to reach out and share the fragments of your blanket, but hesitation seized you. The resource here is survival. One less inch of clothing, one less bit of warmth, and you are one step closer to death. However, when he coughed out a dry and fragile sound, you found yourself sliding the edge of the rag towards him. He accepted it silently, his eyes wide open, and even in the dirt, gratitude shone brightly. The cells now feel different. His presence magnifies the cruelty of every drop of water. You have become numb to your own pain, that when you see its reflection in a child, every kind of pain becomes fresh. When a mouse was running around on the floor, he drew in a sharp breath and shrank back. You want to tell him not to be afraid, that these creatures are both companions and torturers, but these words sound very empty. The noise of the night rang out again. People were groaning, iron chains were jingling, and guards in the distance were shouting. Every time the boy heard a sound, he would tremble and his eyes would quickly look towards the door, as if there was still a chance of escape. You remember your first night, when the weight of consciousness weighed on your chest like a stone. For him, this kind of pressure will multiply due to the fear that he is too young to understand. Some scholars believe that the presence of children in cells makes adults stronger, more desperate, and even more fierce. Others, however, believe that it offends them and stirs up the forgotten instinct of care. You have both feelings tonight. Some prisoners glared at the boy, muttering curses, saying that now another mouth had shared their meager rations. The others moved closer, whispering comforting words. In dungeons, compassion and cruelty often sleep side by side. You closed your eyes, but the boy's sobs kept you from falling asleep. This sound is different from the groans of adults, thinner, sharper, and capable of piercing through stones. You covered your ears with your hands, but the sound still reached your ears. It wasn't until you were exhausted that both of you fell into a light sleep. The dream came strangely and heavily. You saw the boy walking barefoot on the snow, with a mouse following behind him like a shadow. He was holding a loaf of bread that was too big in his hand, and with every step he took, he sank into the frost. You tried to follow, but the chains pulled you down and he vanished into the darkness. When you woke up, your heart was pounding. You weren't sure if you had dreamed of his future or your own guilt. When dawn broke, he was still curled up beside you, even smaller than he looked at first. His breathing was slightly indistinct in the air, proving that he had survived the night. You felt relieved, even though you knew that the days to come would torment him just as they would others. When you watched him wake up and rub his eyes with his tiny fists, you realized that this dungeon was not only a prison of the body, but also a prison of innocence, even devouring those who had just managed to have a chance to live freely. This kind of knowledge can chill your heart more than a stone. The boy's breathing stabilized beside you, but on the same day, another figure dragged his feet into the cell. A person whose accent is obviously that of a foreigner. He stammered in the local language, and when he cursed, the syllables in his mouth were distorted differently. He wrapped his arms around himself and muttered to himself in a language you couldn't understand, although his tone was unmistakable. He was very cold and very angry. There was no nationality discrimination in medieval prisons. The siege brought captives from distant lands, and merchants who had disputes with guilds or lords often found themselves imprisoned far from home. Documents from British courts listed Italians, Fleming people and Spaniards being confined in cells next to the locals. Some accounts even mention the Moors and Eastern merchants who were captured in the raid. These people not only endured the pain of the dungeon, but also the cruelty of being strangers in a climate that their bodies could not bear. There is an unusual anecdote circulating in a French chronicle. As Sarri's captive begged the guard for straw, not to sleep on it and to burn it. It's hard to believe that humans can survive on a night without fire. It is said that he lost weight within a few weeks. His system collapsed in the frost in the north. You glanced at the shivering man, wondering if his fate would be the same. Scholars still have differences regarding the treatment of foreign prisoners. Some people believe that they have received a slight leniency, which is regarded as the value of rents, a more diplomatic means. Others insist that the hardships they suffer are more severe, they are regarded as outsiders, and there are no relatives nearby who can bring bribes or food. The truth is vague, but tonight you only see one fact. This person's loneliness is something you've never experienced before, he muttered to himself, stamping his feet and trying to warm up his limbs. His cloak is very thin and quite suitable for warm weather. You heard his teeth tapping, and he pressed his knees tightly against his chest, his eyes scanning the shadows suspiciously. Every sound, the puff of the prisoner, the creaking of the iron chain, the squeaking of the mouse, seemed to scare him. You imagine the warmth of his hometown and the familiarity of his own language, feeling a wave of pity. The child is moving around you, staring at you with wide eyes. The foreigner noticed, forced a smile and whispered a few comforting words. The boy couldn't understand the lyrics, but the tone outweighed the words. He leaned against you. Because of the appearance of another person's voice, he was temporarily relieved. In this cell, comfort is sometimes silent. The night was dark, and you listened to that man's voice intermittently in your understanding. Some phrases you can recognize the names of saints for warmth, but others are strange syllables that roll like water. They bring you into a half-minus awake, half-minus asleep state, and the foreign language turns into a lullaby. However, this person's tones suddenly changed, becoming sharp out of anger. You opened your eyes and saw him kicking the straw dejectedly. He made frantic gestures pointing to the dripping wall, the iron chain and the mouse, as if roaring at the invisible judge. You know he's complaining about the absurdity of all this. Even if you don't understand, you can still sense the anger from his words. Later, he fell silent, trembling so violently that you were worried he would fall. You pushed your blanket to him without hesitation. He hesitated for a moment, then grabbed a corner and hugged it tightly to his chest. You all pretended not to notice, but this gesture made up for the gap that words couldn't bridge. During these few hours, you are neither locals nor foreigners, neither captives nor prisoners. You are just bodies struggling against the cold. Modern researchers speculate that this shared pain establishes brief connections among strangers. In the letters of the knights detained overseas, it was mentioned that despite differences in language and belief, the comradeship among them remained strong. Others described hostility and even violence during food shortages. The balance between kinship and hostility often changes with each ration and the severity of each frost. At dawn, you realize that the foreigner has finally fallen asleep. His breathing was rough, but steady. You were looking at him in the dim light. The sharp edges on his face softened from exhaustion. Perhaps when he wakes up tomorrow, he will still be cursing with his tongue and stamping his feet to keep warm. Perhaps he won't wake up at all. Anyway, tonight he shared with me the same blanket, the same pain, and the same fragile humanity. You lean against the wall, half closing your eyes. This thought is heavy in your mind. Captivity has eliminated the boundaries here. Language and motherland are not important. Cold, hunger, and despair were all spoken fluently in everyone's mouth. Even when that foreigner is asleep, his muttering still lingers in your ears. But the dungeon is not over for you yet. Tonight, a new sound came from the corridor. It doesn't belong to the sounds of songs or prayers, nor even to the creaking of chains. They were sharper and shorter, and from time to time, they were interspersed with cries that pierced the silence like knives. You gradually recognized them, your heart filled with fear. Someone is being tortured somewhere nearby. Written records about castles and prisons often describe rooms that are not for sleeping but for breaking. These rooms were never far from the cells, for the suffering of the tortured was destined to be heard. The chronicler of the Tower of London noticed that moans and screams were a kind of warning, floating around in the corridors, reminding the prisoners of the cost of disobedience. Tonight, this warning is loud. A disturbing anecdote comes from the records of Nuremberg in the 14th century. The prisoners claimed that they could tell which device was in use by the sound of their screams. The shelf let out a long, stretching howl. The whip let out a shorter cry. The farce came to an end in a sudden silence. Now he ran an echo shiver, and realized that you are involuntarily trying to make the same guess. Experts are still not sure whether torture is as frequent as the legends say. Some people believe that these devices are more symbolic and are rarely used to evoke fear. Others insist that this is a routine matter and is carried out during the interrogation process. The debate is still ongoing, but your body doesn't care about the statistics. The sounds you hear are real, each one feels like a blade pressing against your skin. The child beside you moved a little, covering his ear with his small hand. The foreigner grumbled angrily and paced within the limits permitted by his chains, as if he could shout loudly, feeling both fear and a strange sense of relief. At least tonight, the screams are someone else's. The smell seems to be even stronger. Perhaps smoke or burning oil was faintly drifting through the crack. When it mixes with mold, you will vomit. It evokes scenes you don't want to imagine. The meat was to cling to the flame, and the clones were smouldering under the torch. They pressed the scraps of the blanket onto your face, but it couldn't block the stench. A scream rang out again, higher and sharper, and then suddenly stopped. The ensuing silence was worse than the noise. You hold your breath waiting for the next cry, but no one comes. On the contrary, footsteps echoed in the corridor, heavy and slow, as if tracking something. The chains jingled, a door slammed shut, and then the dungeon returned to calm. You glanced at the boy. His eyes were wide open, shining with fear. You said something softly, though you weren't sure what kind of comfort it was or if it was just to fill the silence with noise. He moved closer and buried his face in your shoulder. The warm feeling of his body on you is very fragile, reminding you to tremble with innocence in the darkest place. Some historians believe that hearing about torture without seeing it might be more destructive than witnessing it directly. After all, imagination will fill in the terror that is more vivid than reality. Others, on the contrary, believe that vision is even worse and the scars left are incomparable to those of sound itself. You want to know which one is true because your brain keeps crying in an endless cycle. The foreigner finally began to sing softly in his own language. This sentence means nothing to you, but the tone stabilizes the atmosphere. The boy leaned against you and relaxed, his breathing slowing down. This song undulates like waves, using its melody to counter the memory of screaming. Close your eyes and let the sound lead you into a half-asleep, half-awake state. But even dreams can be tarnished. You will see torches placed on both sides of the corridor, figures bending over under the ironware, and endless shadows. You hear crying again, now mixed with laughter, a bizarre blend of pain and entertainment. When you woke up, your forehead was covered in sweat and you were shaking even more than before. The long night continued mercilessly. Every brook and every drop of water seems to have been magnified. You waited for another scream, another reminder, but no one came. Silence has turned into a torment, weighing down on your chest like a stone. At dawn you were exhausted, physically weak and mentally drained. The boy moved a little, and the foreigner stiffly straightened his back. You all pretended not to remember the crying that lingered in the night. But you remember. You will always. The cruelest truth came crashing down heavily. In such a dungeon, even if the pain belongs to someone else, you still have to share it. The stone carries every echo, and the cold ensures that there is no pain, which is true privacy. The echoes of torment still linger in your mind. But tonight, the dungeon brought another lesson. When the iron gate opened and another captive was pushed in, you immediately noticed that she was different from the others. Although her dress was torn, it still wrapped around her legs, wrapped around her shoulders. She's a woman. In this place, details can change everything. Historical records confirm that medieval prisons did hold women, although in smaller numbers. Some people were accused of theft or witchcraft. Some were accused of heresy, and many simply inherited debts from their fathers or husbands. A 14th-century record in Yorkshire shows that a washerwoman was imprisoned for stealing clothes without receiving any payment. In Paris, women accused of talking too boldly about officials may be imprisoned in bent cells for weeks. The appearance of the woman did not soften the atmosphere of the dungeon. It often intensifies its cruelty. Lubeck has a strange story about women using clothes to keep warm. The skirt was turned into a blanket, the shawl into a cushion, and the long hair was braided into thick braids to keep the neck warm. You watch the woman in your cell curl up in the corner, pull her shawl tight and drape her skirt over her lap, as if building a fortress with fabric to protect against the frost. Researchers still disagree on whether female prisoners receive slightly better treatment. Some people said that out of sympathy for their vulnerability, the guards allowed them to wear more clothes. Others hold the opposite view, believing that women are subject to more severe ridicule and that discomfort is regarded as entertainment. Contradictory evidence reflects your current feelings, and you're unsure whether her presence will make the person in possession of the key kind or cruel. The boy looked at her with wide eyes, seemingly very surprised to see tenderness in such a place. The foreigner mumbled greetings in a jumbled language intermittently, curling up in her shawl. Here, silence itself was a form of defense. The night was still going on. You noticed that she often turned, trying to fold her skirt up to keep warm from the cold of the floor. Every movement will make the fabric on the stone produce the faintest rustling sound. This sound is just too inappropriate in the dungeon. It feels like music. She adjusted, folded, and folded again. This is a rhythm that you can recognize. Improvisation, despair, survival. The smell of mold still lingers. The mice were still running around in a panic, but the appearance of Hirsch Olden's skirt changed the air. Look, the dress here is not just about modesty. This is a weapon against bad weather. Do you still remember that in the chronicles? Women sometimes tore strips from their own clothes to wrap around their children's feet, or wove them into rough ropes. Even if the fabric is thin and torn, it becomes a lifeline. At some point, she noticed the boy trembling violently. Without hesitation, she draped a corner of the shawl over his shoulder. He leaned gratefully against her. For the first time in weeks, you saw something rare, tenderness blooming in the darkness. This act pricks you not because it hurts, but because it reminds you of how easily sympathy can survive. Even here, some modern scholars believe that the presence of women in prisons has introduced a fragile network of care, bringing gentle moments to what was originally a cruel environment. Others, however, believe that this posture was fleeting and was soon devoured by the hunger in the dungeon. Looking at the boy resting under Hirsch Oll, you realize that both situations might be correct. Compassion is temporary here, but its spark burns brighter precisely because it is rare. The foreigner became restless and began to hum in his strange language again. This time the woman gently joined in. Her voice was deep and steady, weaving a strange harmony. You lie against the wall and listen. The duet pierces through the straw, taking you to a cold and distant place. For a few minutes, the cell was not like a dungeon, but more like a gathering place for survivors. They were not bound by chains, but by fragile songs and fabrics. However, here, comfort will never last. A guard stepped past and shouted a few foul words loudly through the fence. The woman froze and tightened her knife. You could see the fear etched on her face. Her clothes might keep her warm, but they couldn't stop men's gazes, for they regarded her as a weak prey. After his boots vanished into the silence, the tense atmosphere lasted for a long time. Sleepiness came slowly. We drifted into the fabric with the rustling and buzzing sounds. Your dream has been distorted, turning the shawl into a flag, the skirt into a tent, and the woman's voice into a monk's chanting. When you woke up, fur was still straw stuck to your skin, but there was also a faint warmth in your chest, which was something you didn't have before. At dawn, the woman was still sitting upright, her shawl draped over the boy like wings. She didn't sleep much, her eyes were heavy and her back was stiff, but she held on. In this dungeon, patience is victory. Tonight, her dress and shawl not only accompanied her but also others through the cold. You realize that survival doesn't always depend on strength or anger. Sometimes it's about the taut fabric, about the shared shawl, about the tenderness that refuses to fade even in the dirtiest stone corner. When the next prisoner arrived, the woman's shawl was still draped over the boy. This person is different again. He is neither ragged nor wild. Instead, he has a straight back and upright shoulders. Even though he is in shackles, his manner is filled with pride. But it was once fine. His hands were covered with ink, not galooses. A political prisoner, you know, the kind who was arrested not for theft or hunger, but for speech, loyalty, or conspiracy. He sighed, slumped over the straw and fumbled for a piece of parchment hidden in his sleeve. The existing chronicles tell us that political prisoners were oft untreated paradoxically. They wandered in their cells for many years because they were too valuable to be killed directly and too dangerous to be released. Some people write poems. Some copied scriptures. Some people secretly write their diaries on pieces of cloth or carve them on the wall. In France, a nobleman accused of treason engraved the entire poem on limestone. His poems are still visible centuries later. If you look at this person now, you will see the same instinct. His fingers long to express themselves, even as frost spreads in the cell. There is a strange story in Scotland about a baron who denied using ink to mix cigarette ash with his own saliva and write inside his cloak. The guards laughed at him for being crazy, but later found that there was a password plan on those marks. You can imagine that tonight's companion is doing the same thing, and his determination has not wavered in the slightest. Researchers still have differences of opinion on whether such articles are tolerated. Some evidence suggests that the jailers ignored the poetry, considering it harmless. Others, however, believe that graffiti could be dangerous and a means of conveying secret information, and should be punished more severely. This uncertainty reflected the quiet tension in the cell, as the man held onto invisible lines on his sleeve and dared not let anyone stop him. The boy stared curiously. The woman looked suspiciously. The foreigner hummed in a low voice as usual. You lay down and listen to that person start reciting in a low voice. His voice was steady, beautiful, and even elegant. Although this sentence is ambiguous, it depicts a scene of sunlight shining on the battlements, a spring river flowing, and freedom's dreamy as a dream. His tone so calm that it almost made one feel as if he refused to admit that his bones had been coldly despised. The noise of the dungeon changed around him. Groans, coughs, and the creaking of chains seemed to soften under his verses. Even the mouse's claws and whiskers were twitching, as if listening. Poetry has become insulating material, enveloping cells in a rhythm that no frost can break. For a few minutes, you were not in the stone but in your memory, not in the filth but in your imagination. Ironically, however, this deeply hurt me. This is a person who once debated with the Lord or gathered allies, but now scribbles on the cloth like a primary school student hiding his notes. You want to know whether he feels proud or humiliated. His words exuded authority, but his eyes revealed exhaustion. The ink on his hand turned into a stain. His cloak is moldy, but the dungeon held on even tighter. Historians debate whether these verses are acts of rebellion or survival. Some people think this is a silent resistance, a fight against silence with words. Others interpret it as a coping mechanism, desperately attempting to gain meaning from pain. When you observe him, both of these points seem to be correct. These verses are not merely poetry. They are the armor to keep warm. The boy moved closer and listened intently. The woman frowned, feeling both envious and distressed. The foreigner muttered to himself with his tongue, perhaps changing the rhythm to his own. Close your eyes and let these words sink in your chest, heavy yet soothing, until they become part of your heartbeat. The lusty smell of decay will not disappear, but this time it competes with the sense of memory, ink, parchment, wax into the library that was not affected by frost. The place depicted by the poet seems out of reach, but in his voice it is full of vitality. Imagine yourself standing on a green and grassy hill, with a warm breeze blowing and the iron chain unfastened. For a moment, you truly believe it, but reality never makes you hesitate. The guard stomped over and heard the man muttering to himself. With a bang he struck the iron railing. "Shut your mouth," he shouted. The poet fell silent at once, lowering his eyes, but his lips were still speaking in a low voice. The guard cursed as he left, and the cell resumed its original rhythm. You realize that poetry is more dangerous than it seems. Words can disturb the jailer more than chains. Slowly, You'll linger between sleep and wakefulness. Anand's recitation runs through your dreams. He talked about justice, betrayal, and the frost that cannot last forever. His voice turned into a lullaby and an alarm, reminding you that even here, the mind is not bound. At dawn, the man fell silent, slumped against the wall, tightly grasping fragments of parchment in his hand. His poem was not yet finished, and his breathing was slightly blurred in the air. However, their memories linger on, warming you in ways that straw and rags can never reach. You realize that surviving in the dungeon is not just about warmth and food. It is about holding on to what frost cannot freeze. The verses, thoughts and contemptuous whispers engraved on stones. The poet's whispers lingered for a long time after the dawn had passed, but the next night brought another kind of whispers. It began to faint, almost drowned out by the creaking of the chain and the coughing of the patient. A low hum, repetitive phrases, and words pieced together rhythmically. At first you thought another prisoner had gone crazy, but later you discovered the pattern. Prayer. Medieval records often mention the persistence of faith in prison, even when chains bit the ankles and frost made the straw brittle. Men and women chanted hymns of prayer beads in low voices. A 14th century report from Avignon described the pagan prayers throughout the night, and their voices echoed so steadily that the guards swore it was their nightmare. Tonight you will hear the same rhythm, a fragile rope being thrown towards despair. There is a strange story circulating in Florence. A woman who was imprisoned for witchcraft recited the same hymn every night until other prisoners began to get annoyed and eventually followed suit. The initial complaints turned into a ritual. It is said that the entire cell fell asleep to the same melody every night. You wonder if your own voice in the dark would do the same, weaving strangers into reluctant congregations. As for whether faith can truly alleviate pain, scholars hold different opinions. Some people believe that prayer is a psychological comfort that brings rhythm and purpose to prisoners when nothing exists. Others, however, insist that it intensifies the torment and reminds the captives of the warmth of heaven when their bodies freeze on the stones. An argument cannot be settled merely by parchment, but lying here and listening to the buzzing sound, you will immediately sense the viewpoints of both sides. The woman who came in a few days ago began to join in. Her voice was gentle yet firm. The boy followed behind, stammering out what he could only remember half of. Even foreigners hummed along. His accent curved the syllables but incorporated harmony. At first you remained silent, but soon you were drawn in by the rhythm. But about survival. Its repetition warms your chest, just like a fire you can't see. The smell of mold still lingers. The mouse is still running around. The cold still lingered, but within a few minutes, those pains vanished under the weight of the hymns. The dungeon turned into a small church without any light. A choir tied up with iron. Close your eyes and let the vibration carry you as if the stone itself were a buzzer. The guard noticed. A person was knocking on the railing, shouting for quiet. The sound was intermittent, but did not stop. Threw a bucket of water into the straw, and then left in a rage. You sat there, soaked through, your teeth quivering, but the song rang out again, as stubborn as frost. You will realize that the prayer here is not only faith, but also rebellion. Time passed slowly. Sometimes the hymns gradually turn into whispers. Sometimes it expands even larger, but it will never disappear. Even if fatigue silences the throat, the lips will continue to move. As on his sleeve, the woman muttered to herself in the boy's ear. That foreigner hummed a song as he went to the cold place. The rhythm has turned into your heartbeat, your breath. That fragile net prevents despair from crushing you. Modern researchers believe that this ritual may help prisoners mark the time and divide the endless night into different sound patterns. Others claim that it creates an illusion of community and blurs the sense of loneliness. Perhaps both are correct. The night would become unbearable. With it, pain becomes almost shareable and softens through repetition. Sleep comes gently, surprising you. You dreamed of the church you once passed by, with sunlight filtering through the stained glass and warmth gathering on the stone floor. You dream of the bell ringing, not for death, but for morning prayer. When you wake up, you can hear nothing but darkness, straw and frost. But memory is like another blanket. At dawn the singing gradually died down, replaced by snoring and coughing. However, the air feels different. The dungeon still gave off a foul smell, still cold, still moaning, but there was something invisible lingering. A line of resistance. A promise that even in the darkness, the voice will not be suppressed. You stretch your stiff limbs, your joints crack, and realize the cruel paradox. Prayer cannot warm your body, but it can warm your will. In a place without chains, where mice enjoy themselves to the fullest, sometimes the will to endure is the only important warmth. Day passed in silence, broken only by moans and coughs, until night returned with frosty claws. When the guards reappear, you're ready to face another sleepless moment. This time he was holding something that jingled, landed over the fence, and the package landed on the straw with a bang. You crawl forward, squint your eyes, and realize what it is. A blanket was not given for free, although the guards lingered, their palms open, waiting. Prison records from all over Europe often mention the self-evident system. Official rations rarely included bedding or firewood, but guards would sell leftovers to those who could afford it. Some coins, promises of labor after release, and even jewels stripped from captives all became warm currency. This practice is very common in prisons in London and even has a nickname called buying the night. You stared at the guard's hand, knowing that the price was always higher than the coin. There is a strange story in Flanders records about a prisoner who exchanged his shoes for a sheepskin. The skin smelled so foul that it almost suffocated him, but he held it tightly until it was released. He walked barefoot in the snow, but he swore that the only reason he could survive was that dirty skin, wondering if its stench could also be your salvation. Historians hold different opinions on whether these exchanges were tolerated or condemned. Some people believe that the system has received unofficial encouragement and falsely reported the wages of underpaid breeders. Others, however, consider this corruption, which, although prohibited, is inevitable in practice. Anyway, tonight you will have to face the same fact as the captives before. If you want warmth, you must pay the price. The poet reached into his sleeve and took out a silver buckle, which had once been part of his cloak. He stuffed the blanket into the guard's palm, and the blanket was pushed into the fence. The guard smiled smugly, muttered a few words that would make the smart men feel comfortable, and then left. You opened the cloth. It's thick and heavy, giving off the smell of damp wool. It feels like a luxury item. Women look with longing eyes, boys with desperate eyes, and foreigners with suspicious eyes. You immediately know that the blanket is not only a tool for keeping warm, but also a spark of tension. In this cell, every comfortable spot has turned into a place of contention. You spread it on your knee and then hesitated. The others watched quietly, waiting. Finally, you widen the edges and invite them down there. They approached one after another until the four of you were squeezed together by its weight. The change is immediate. Warmth, though faint, is real. Your shoulders brushed past, your breaths mingled. For the first time in weeks, the air beneath felt almost safe, flying softly. The woman adjusted her shawl to fill in the gaps. The foreigner muttered to himself with his tongue, but his hand grasped even tighter. The dungeon was still cold, still filthy, and still gave off a strong musty smell. But under the blanket, you will think of a fireplace. Imagine a farmhouse where a family sits around the fire, sharing food and stories. This illusion will last for a long time until you fall asleep. However, even if you wander, you know that the blanket is not a blessing without cost. The poet paid a huge price, and the guards will expect more tomorrow. Perhaps it's a coin, perhaps it's a secret, perhaps it's obedience. Here, comfort is never free. It is another chain, though softer, yet equally binding. Researchers believe that this kind of transaction blurs the line between punishment and survival. The guard profited from suffering, and the prisoner learned to bargain with a little dignity. Some people even trade their own blood for wine or cloth. Others suggest darker deals that have not been recorded, but have been passed down in chronicles. The fact is terrifyingly simple. Warmth can always be bought, but there will never be no debt. Feeling its rough fibers itchy on your skin. You know it might be taken away tomorrow or charged a higher price, but tonight it will protect you. Tonight, you share warmth with strangers who have become reluctant companions. The boy went to sleep first, breathing evenly. The woman followed behind, her shawl undulating up and down. The foreigner muttered until his voice disappeared. The poet looked up at the sky, his lips moving quietly, perhaps reciting another verse. You look at him until you close your eyes, and the blanket pulls you into a dream warmer than reality. At dawn, frost formed on the walls again, but your limbs were not as stiff as usual. You realize that you rested more last night than you thought. The blanket is weighing heavily on you. This is evidence of a deal made in despair. When the guard returned, the keys jingled, and you understood the lesson left by this night. In the dungeon, comfort is currency. The price of every bit of warmth is much colder than the stone floor itself. The rough blanket was like a sinful secret, lingering all day long. By nightfall, it had absorbed the stench of mold and sweat, but none of you dares to let go,